Anton bent over the sink, the steam clouding his face, his hands deep in greasy water that smelled of fish, detergent, and something faintly metallic. He had been a dishwasher for 6 months at the embassy's private kitchen, long enough to be invisible, long enough for no one to wonder why he never joined in conversations or smiled. The other kitchen staff had grown used to his silence, his awkward nods, and the way his eyes lingered on things too long, like the embassy clock, the locked wine cabinet, or the polished silver trays. He was a ghost in plain sight, and that was the way he needed it to be. But tonight, something shifted. It was the ambassador's private dinner. A long table covered in crystal, pale flowers, and cutlery so sharp it gleamed like small knives. Important guests were seated: 2 generals, a senator from across the ocean, and the ambassador himself. Charles Whitmore, a man with the voice of a preacher, and the calm, unreadable eyes of a chess player. Anton should not have been able to see them. He was supposed to stay in the back, feeding plates into the sink, the hum of the machine drowning out his thoughts. But he drifted closer to the half-open door. He couldn't help it. Their voices carried measured, polite, until one word cut through the polite hum like a gunshot. "'Cause!" Anton froze. His hands trembled in the hot water. Soap bubbles burst against his skin, but he barely felt the sting. Kursk. That was not a word these men should be saying. Not here. Not in this room. Not with smiles painted on their faces. He leaned closer, his lips moving before he realized it. A whisper escaped low, urgent, Russian. The words fell out like they had been waiting years for this moment. Vaini, dolsny, itogo, delot. You must not do this. The room went silent. Silver forks halted midair. The senator tilted his head, eyes narrowing. General Sloane shifted in his chair, but it was the ambassador Charles Whitmore who reacted most violently. His hand gripped the table, his knuckles white, his eyes wide. He stared toward the kitchen door, as though he had seen a ghost. The dishwasher had whispered in Russian, words the ambassador had not heard since 1987. Words that no stranger should know. Anton realized what he had done. He shut his mouth, heart hammering. He could still hear the machine behind him, the clatter of dishes, the sound of his own blood roaring in his ears. But it was too late. The ambassador stood. His chair scraped the floor. Every guest turned to watch him, but his eyes never left the doorway where Anton now stood frozen. "You," Whitmore said softly, his voice trembling. "Where did you hear those words?" Anton didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was locked tight, his mind a blur of memories he had buried beneath years of silence. He should have stayed invisible. He should have swallowed the words. Instead, the past had slipped out, and the ambassador had recognized it instantly. A dangerous recognition. Anton tried to step back, but Whitmore moved toward him slow, deliberate. The generals whispered among themselves. The senator frowned, but none of them understood the electricity crackling in the air. Only the ambassador did. Only Anton did. And both knew the dinner was no longer about diplomacy. It was about something buried, something secret, something that should have stayed drowned. But now, with one whispered sentence, it was rising again. Anton didn't breathe as the ambassador's shoes clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing like a gunshot in the silent dining hall. He wanted to run. He wanted to melt back into the shadows, to pretend he was just another faceless worker scrubbing dishes in a room nobody cared about. But Whitmore's stare held him like a spotlight. The man was calm, but his calmness was worse than anger. It was the kind of stillness a predator had before it pounced. Whitmore stopped just short of the kitchen door. He lowered his voice so the others couldn't hear, but Anton caught every syllable. "Who sent you?" Anton's mouth opened, but no sound came. His throat burned, dry as ash. "Answer me," Whitmore said. His voice cracked not with rage, but with something Anton recognized instantly. Fear. The ambassador, man who dined with generals and senators, who had faced crises on 3 continents without blinking, was afraid. And not of the guests, not of politics, not of losing face. He was afraid of Anton. "Sir," The senator called from the table, shifting uncomfortably. Is everything all right? Whitmore didn't look back. Continue without me! I'll handle this. The way he said it made Anton's stomach twist like a problem. Like something to be removed. Whitmore stepped into the kitchen, closing the door behind him. The clink of crystal and murmured conversations resumed faintly beyond the walls. But in here, it was just the two of them, the dishwasher and the ambassador. The silence stretched, broken only by the hiss of the dishwasher machine. Anton wiped his wet hands on his apron, his pulse thudding so loudly he was sure Whitmore could hear it. You spoke Russian, Whitmore said. Not just Russian, my Russian. Words that were said in a room where you could not possibly have been. Anton stared at the floor. He couldn't let his eyes meet the ambassador's. If he did, the memories would come crashing back to the cold room, the smell of smoke, the sound of men screaming underwater. He had built walls to keep it all out. And yet, one word at a dinner table had cracked everything. Whitmore's hands slammed against the counter. The sharp sound made Anton flinch. Who sent you? Finally, Anton found his voice, though it was barely more than a rasp. No one. The ambassador leaned closer, his breath heavy with wine and something bitter. Don't lie to me. Not about this. Not about Kursk. The word hung between them like a curse.
Anton shook his head slowly. I shouldn't have said it. Whitmore's jaw clenched. For a moment, he seemed less like a diplomat and more like a man cornered by his own past. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket. Anton's heart lurched. But instead of a weapon, Whitmore pulled out a cigarette case. He snapped it open with shaking fingers, lit one, and exhaled smoke like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Do you even know what you've done? Whitmore muttered. If they had heard you properly, if they understood. He trailed off, staring at the tiled wall as though expecting it to answer. Anton swallowed hard. I heard the word. I remembered. That's all. Whitmore turned sharply, eyes narrowing. Remembered, from where? Anton's chest tightened. Images flashed uninvited, a steel hull groaning under pressure. Men pounding on metal, their fists muffled by water, a red light flickering in the dark, and a boy's voice, whispering the same words he had just spoken tonight. His hands gripped the counter to steady himself. He couldn't tell Whitmore that. He couldn't even tell himself that. Whitmore studied him, the smoke curling around his face. You don't belong here, he said at last. Dishwashers don't know what you know. Anton raised his eyes, just enough to meet Whitmore's stare. And ambassadors don't freeze at the sound of a whisper. The word struck deeper than he intended. Whitmore's face hardened, but beneath it, Anton saw the flicker of something raw, guilt. The door behind them creaked open. One of the generals stepped inside, his heavy boots announcing him before his voice did. Charles, everything all right? Whitmore straightened instantly, the mask sliding back over his face. Yes, he said, his tone smooth again. Just a staff matter. Nothing important, but Anton knew better. Nothing about this was unimportant. The general's eyes lingered on Anton, suspicious, before he nodded and retreated. The door clicked shut. Whitmore leaned close again, his voice a whisper now. Listen carefully. You will not say another word of Russian in this building. You will not repeat those phrases. You will forget them. Do you understand? Anton felt the words pressing against his lips again, desperate to escape. Not out of rebellion, but because he couldn't stop them. They had lived inside him too long. Instead, he forced himself to nod. Whitmore searched his face for a moment, then turned back toward the dining room. But before he opened the door, he said something that made Anton's blood run cold. If you keep talking, they won't come for me. They'll come for you. And then he was gone. Anton stood alone in the kitchen, trembling, staring at the reflection of himself in the steel sink. He barely recognized the man staring back. The invisible dishwasher was gone. In his place was someone who carried a secret so dangerous that the ambassador of a nation had looked at him with terror. He pressed his palms against his ears, trying to shut out the echoes of the past. But they were louder now, insistent, the sound of water, rushing, crushing, swallowing men alive. The word course ringing like a bell. And beneath it all, the boy's whisper, Vy any dolznia togo delit. "You must not do this." Anton's knees buckled. He slid down against the counter, clutching his apron. He didn't understand why the words came back now, why they had chosen this night, this table, this man. But something told him the silence he had lived in was over. Whatever had drowned years ago was rising. Anton did not sleep that night. He lay in the small servants' quarters beneath the embassy, staring at the cracked ceiling, as though the plaster itself was whispering back the words he had spoken. The walls were thin. He could hear the muffled laughter of staff upstairs, the shuffle of feet, a distant radio. But inside his room, silence pressed down heavy, thick enough to choke. His hands smelled of detergent, though he had washed them a dozen times. The scent clung, as though trying to remind him who he was supposed to be: invisible, ordinary, harmless. But invisible men did not carry voices from the dead. He pressed his palms to his eyes. The memories were not dreams, not imagination. They came in shards, fragments, so sharp they cut through years of carefully built silence. He saw again the steel corridor, water rushing in like a black beast, boots pounding, men clawing at sealed doors. He had been too young, too far away to have seen it, and yet he knew. The boy's whisper echoed, "Vi any dolznia togo delit, you must not do this." He turned onto his side, curling into himself. He remembered being 12 years old, sitting in a Moscow apartment while his uncle red-eyed from drink told stories in broken sentences. Stories about sailors who never returned, about orders given and orders ignored. About a submarine called Kursk. Anton hadn't understood then. But now, older, those fragments threaded together like a net tightening around him, and somehow, Whitmore knew. The thought clawed at him. Why had the ambassador reacted like that? Why had a single whispered sentence shattered the mask of a man who negotiated wars, unless Whitmore had been there? Unless Whitmore carried the same ghost? Anton sat up abruptly. His chest ached from holding the thought in. He needed air. He needed to breathe without hearing voices that weren't his. He crept out of his room and into the embassy hallways. The building at night was different, hollow, echoing, almost predatory in its silence. Paintings of dead men in uniforms stared down at him as though judging his trespass. He moved quietly, his footsteps muffled by the old carpet. He wasn't too sure where he was going until he found himself at the corridor outside Whitmore's office. The heavy oak door was shut, but a line of light bled beneath it. The ambassador was awake. Anton's pulse spiked. He should turn back. He should go downstairs, back to his cot, back to pretending. But something tugged him closer. He pressed his ear to the door. Inside, Whitmore's voice carried low, tight, urgent. It's not possible. He couldn't know. He was a child then. A pause, the rustle of paper. The faint crackle of a phone line. They'll ask questions if they hear it again. You know what that means. Anton's stomach turned. The ambassador was speaking to someone who also knew. Whitmore's tone sharpened. Then he has to disappear, quietly. You understand me? Not here, not in this building. Too many eyes. No. Anton jerked back, heart pounding. He didn't wait to hear more. His footsteps carried him swiftly down the hall, back into the darkness of the servants' quarters. Disappear. They were going to erase him. The next morning, Anton washed dishes as though nothing had happened. He scrubbed it harder than usual, his fingers raw, the hot water scalding his skin. Every time the kitchen door opened, his shoulders tensed, waiting for Whitmore to step in with a polite smile and cold eyes, waiting for the order to be carried out. But Whitmore didn't come, not during breakfast, not during lunch. Still, Anton felt the man's shadow everywhere. At noon, as the other staff bustled around, one of the waiters leaned close. You all right, Anton? You look pale. Anton forced a nod. Didn't sleep, the waiter chuckled. Join the club. This place eats you alive. He walked away, humming, oblivious. Anton's hand shook as he loaded another tray into the dishwasher. He wasn't sure if he could keep pretending. The words wanted out. They pressed against his throat, clawing for release. That night, the opportunity came. The ambassador hosted another gathering, smaller, quieter. Only to guests this time, both speaking in low tones about shipping routes and oil contracts. Anton carried trays in and out, his face blank, his steps measured. But every time he passed Whitmore, he felt the man's eyes pinning him down, heavy, watchful. And then it happened. One of the guests, an older Russian man with a crooked smile, laugh softly. Do you remember Severomorsk, Charles, that dinner, just before? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Anton froze, the tray in his hands trembling. The name hit him like a blow. Severomorsk, he had heard it once before from his uncle's slurred stories. A naval base, the place where secrets were buried deeper than the sea. The whisper came again, unbidden, unstoppable. His lips moved before he could think. Severomorsk. V.S. Nakolostam. It all began there. The tray clattered from his hands, silverware scattering across the floor. Silence. The Russian guest stared at him, eyes widening. Whitmore's face went pale. Anton's breath came in sharp bursts. He wanted to run, but his legs refused. He could feel the weight of three men's eyes, two curious, one terrified. The Russian leaned forward, voice sharp. What did you say? Whitmore barked, too quickly. He doesn't know what he's saying. He's staff, nothing more, but it was too late. The Russian's gaze hardened. No dishwasher speaks like that. No dishwasher remembers Severomorsk. Anton felt the room tilt, the air to thin, the chandelier lights blinding. He didn't understand why he knew these places, why these words lived in him. But the look on Whitmore's face told him the truth. It wasn't coincidence. He was tied to something buried, something dangerous, and now, others had seen it too. Later that night, Anton locked himself in his small room, shaking uncontrollably. He pressed his forehead to the cool wall, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Memories surged again, clearer this time. A map on a wall, marked with red circles. Men in uniforms arguing in both Russian and English. A boy, younger than him, standing in the corner, watching, listening. And Whitmore, younger, thinner, but undeniably him. His voice steady as he said words Anton could still hear in his bones. If it fails, no one must know. Anton gasped, clutching his chest. He had been there. Not in body, perhaps, but in memory. A memory that did not belong to him, yet lived inside him. He whispered into the dark, his own voice trembling. What are you hiding, Charles Whitmore? For the first time, he understood that he wasn't simply remembering. He was carrying something, a fragment of truth that had survived when others drowned. And if Whitmore wanted it buried, Anton realized with a cold shiver, then it was something that could topple more than just one man. It could topple nations. Anton dreamt of drowning. The dream was always the same. Steel walls pressing in, lights flickering, the water rising faster than breath could be taken. Men clawed at doors that wouldn't open, their voices muffled by metal, their fists leaving only dull thuds. He stood among them, but he was not one of them. He was both inside and outside at once, watching through the eyes of the dead. When he woke, the sound of rushing water still roared in his ears. He sat upright in the cot, drenched in sweat, his chest heaving as if he'd surfaced from the bottom of the ocean. The tiny room seemed smaller now, the ceiling lower, the air too thin. He pressed his face into his palms. He couldn't keep going like this. He couldn't keep washing dishes with ghosts whispering in his head, with words spilling from his mouth that didn't belong to him. And yet, he couldn't tell anyone, because now he knew what would happen if he did. The embassy that morning felt colder, though the heaters hummed as usual. Anton moved through the kitchen, stacking plates, listening to the idle chatter of staff. Their words skimmed past him, meaningless, like radio static. Only one thing mattered. Whitmore, the ambassador, had not spoken to him since last night. No warning, no reprimand, no acknowledgement at all. That silence was worse than any threat. Anton glanced through the swinging door into the dining hall. Whitmore sat alone at the head of the table, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling before him. He wasn't reading his papers, wasn't on the phone. He just sat there, staring at nothing, the smoke from his cigarette curling into the air like a signal no one else could read. Anton quickly looked away, but the moment their eyes met, even briefly, he knew. Whitmore hadn't forgotten. He was thinking, calculating, deciding what to do about the dishwasher who carried the voice of the dead. By evening, Anton couldn't take it anymore. He had to know. He waited until the staff thinned out, until only a few lingered in the back rooms. Then, instead of going to his quarters, he slipped quietly through the corridor that led to Whitmore's office. The door was locked, of course it was, but the embassy was old, and Anton had learned things while drifting invisibly through its halls. A bent hairpin from the laundry cart fit neatly into the lock. His hand shook as he turned it, but the mechanism gave with a soft click. Inside, the office smelled of tobacco, leather, and something faintly metallic like the air of a ship's hull. The room was neat, but too neat, as though it had been cleaned to erase something. Anton's eyes went to the desk. Papers lay stacked in precise piles. But one folder sat slightly ajar. He pulled it closer. Inside were photographs. Grainy, black and white, the edges smudged, men in uniforms. A submarine, half submerged in icy water. A group of officials standing at a naval base. And among them Anton's breath caught was Whitmore, younger, but unmistakable. Standing at Severomorsk, Anton's pulse raced. He flipped to another page, a list of names, typed neatly in Cyrillic. He scanned them quickly, and one jumped out at him, Sergei Antonov. He froze, his father's name. His hands trembled as he traced the letters. His father had died when Anton was a boy. That was all his mother had told him. No details, just absence, sealed behind silence. But here it was, on a list tied to Kursk. The folder slipped from his hands, photographs scattering across the floor. He scrambled to gather them, his heart hammering, when a shadow fell across him. Looking for something? Anton's blood turned to ice. He looked up. Whitmore stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, though his eyes burned with quiet fury. Anton stammered, I was cleaning, don't lie to me. Whitmore stepped inside, closing the door behind him. You broke into my office. Anton's mouth went dry. I saw my father's name. Whitmore froze mid-step. His expression faltered for just a second, enough for Anton to see it, the recognition. The guilt. You shouldn't have seen that, Whitmore said finally, his voice low. Anton's voice rose despite himself. Why was my father on that list? What happened to him? What does Kursk have to do with you? Whitmore's cigarette trembled between his fingers. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he exhaled smoke, sharp and bitter. You think you want the truth, he said softly. But the truth is the kind of thing that eats a man alive. It doesn't set you free. It chains you to ghosts you can't bury. Anton's fists clenched. They're already here. I hear them. I see them. Every night. And you, he stepped closer, his voice breaking. You know why. Whitmore looked at him for a long time, then sank into the chair behind his desk. He rubbed his temples with shaking hands. Kursk wasn't an accident, he whispered. It was a message. And your father, he broke off, shaking his head. He was one of the men who tried to stop it. Anton's chest tightened. Stop what? Whitmore's eyes flicked up, dark and hollow. A deal that was never meant to exist, between men who wore different flags but shared the same hunger. A submarine that wasn't supposed to sail, but did. And when it sank, it wasn't just metal and men that drowned, it was secrets. Secrets I've spent my life trying to keep buried. Anton staggered back, the weight of it crushing him. His father had been part of this. His death wasn't a tragedy of war, it was a consequence of silence, of betrayal. Why me? Anton whispered. Why do I remember things I shouldn't? Whitmore leaned forward, his face etched with something close to pity. Because memory doesn't always belong to those who lived it. Sometimes it clings to bloodlines, to sons, to those left behind. You carry what your father carried, whether you want it or not. Anton's breath shook. He wanted to deny it, to call it madness, but the fragments, the whispers, the visions, they all made sense now. They weren't just dreams, they were inheritance. Whitmore's voice hardened. That's why you have to stop speaking. If others hear you, if they realize what's inside your head, then you're already dead. Do you understand? Anton's knees weakened. He clutched the edge of the desk to stay upright. His father's ghost, Kursk, Severomorsk, Whitmore's past, it all pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. But beneath the fear, something else flickered, a spark. If he carried the truth, then he carried the power to destroy the men who had buried it, including Whitmore. He lifted his eyes, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Maybe I don't want to stop. Whitmore's face hardened, the mask snapping back in place. Then you won't live long enough to regret it. The room fell silent, the thread hanging like a blade between them. And for the first time, Anton realized the choice before him was no longer about silence or survival. It was about whether he was willing to become the voice his father never could. Anton couldn't shake the sound of his father's name echoing in Whitmore's office. It clung to him like smoke, seeping into his skin, burning his lungs with every breath. All day, as he scrubbed pans and rinsed glasses, his mind replayed the ambassador's words. Your father tried to stop it. Stop what? Every clang of silverware, every hiss of steam from the dishwasher became part of a rhythm in his head, a rhythm that sounded like men pounding on steel doors, like sailors trapped in a submarine praying for air. He dropped a glass once, watched it shatter into pieces across the tiles, and felt a strange kinship with it. Broken, scattered, sharp. The staff laughed at his clumsiness. He forced a smile, but his hands shook so badly he could hardly lift the next tray. By the evening, he was trembling too much to work. He slipped out, ignored the voices calling after him, and locked himself in his room. He paced in circles, muttering to himself, whispering in Russian, words he didn't remember learning, but now couldn't stop saying. My dolzny byli skazat pravdu, oni utopili ik, oni zakrili dveri. We were supposed to tell the truth. They drowned them, they sealed the doors. His reflection in the cracked mirror startled him. His lips moved, but the voice that filled the room wasn't his alone. It was deeper, older, layered with tones of men who weren't there. For a moment, it was his father staring back. Anton staggered back, his chest heaving. He wanted to scream, he wanted silence, but the whispers only grew louder. The next morning, he found Whitmore waiting for him in the kitchen. The ambassador had no reason to be there, yet he stood among the trays and steam as if it were his throne. The staff shifted nervously, whispering among themselves, until Whitmore dismissed them with a glance. Leave us, Anton froze, the soapy sponge slipping from his hand. When the door closed and they were alone, Whitmore stepped closer. You look pale, the ambassador said softly, almost kindly. The dreams are getting worse, aren't they? Anton's throat tightened. How do you know? Whitmore exhaled smoke from his cigarette, his hand steady now, calm like a man who had decided on something final. Because I had them too, after Severomorsk. After Kursk, the ghosts don't let go, they wait, they whisper, they remind you of what you buried. Until you stop pretending. Anton's nails dug into his palms. You buried them alive. Whitmore's eyes flickered, just a second, but Anton saw it. The truth pressed against his calm facade, threatening to break through. You think shouting ghosts will change anything? Whitmore asked. You think men in uniforms care about sailors who died 20 years ago? They'll erase you before you open your mouth. The world doesn't want truth, Anton, it wants silence. Anton shook his head, his voice trembling. No, it wants someone to remember. The ambassador leaned closer, his whisper sharp. Then you'd better decide what matters more, being remembered or surviving long enough to matter. Anton's skin crawled. The threat was clear, but Whitmore's words carried something else, something almost like despair. The ambassador wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting something larger, something Anton couldn't yet see. That night, Anton's dream shifted. No drowning this time. Instead, he saw a long table in a steel room, maps spread out, red circles inked across northern seas. Men argued, their voices a blur, until one man slammed his fist on the table. His face was clear this time. His father, Niet, Sergei Antonov roared. You cannot order this, they are not expendable. They are men, not numbers. Another voice, American, calm, deliberate. If the truth surfaces, it will tear both sides apart. Better they sink quietly than the world learns who signed the deal. Anton jolted awake, gasping, his hands gripping the sheets. His body trembled, but not with fear, with rage. His father hadn't died at sea. He had been silenced, betrayed, and Whitmore had been there. The next day, Anton carried trays to the dining room, his eyes never leaving the ambassador. Whitmore laughed with his guests, poured wine, told stories. To everyone else, he was a statesman, dignified, untouchable. But to Anton, he was a man with blood on his hands. The voices pressed harder. Speak, tell them, show them. Anton nearly dropped the tray again. He bit his tongue, forced himself back into the kitchen, gripping the counter so hard his knuckles whitened. If he spoke, he'd be dead. Whitmore had promised as much. And yet, the silence was already killing him. That night, unable to bear it, Anton returned to the ambassador's office. This time, he didn't care if he was caught. He tore through drawers, scattering papers across the floor. He found more lists, names, dates, coordinates. He found cables marked classified, with entire paragraphs blacked out, and then he found it, a photograph. Not of Kursk, not of sailors, but of his father, Sergei Antonov, standing beside a much younger Whitmore. Both wore expressions tight with secrecy, their eyes shadowed as though they already knew they were condemned. On the back, in faded ink, Severomorsk, 1999, contingency signed. Anton clutched the photo, his vision blurring. His father hadn't been just a casualty. He had been part of the decision, part of the silence. The betrayal burned deeper than the ghosts. His father had known. The door creaked open. Whitmore stood there, his face shadowed by the dim light. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he simply closed the door behind him and lit a cigarette. "I wondered when you'd find that," he said quietly. Anton's voice cracked. He knew. "My father, he knew they were going to drown." Whitmore sat heavily in the chair, exhaling smoke. He tried to stop it, but in the end, he signed. "We all did." Because the alternative was worse. Anton shook his head violently. Worse than 118 men trapped at the bottom of the sea. Worse than silence? Whitmore's gaze hardened. Worse than war. The Kursk wasn't just a submarine, Anton. It was proof. Proof of a weapon that wasn't supposed to exist. Proof that both sides were willing to trade lives to keep it hidden. If the world had known then, it wouldn't have been one sub. It would have been fleets, missiles, millions dead. Anton's chest heaved. The photo trembled in his hand. He wanted to throw it at Whitmore's face, to tear it apart, to scream until the whole embassy heard. But another whisper filled the room, his father's voice, faint but clear. "Forgive me, cynic. I chose silence so you could live." Anton sank to the floor, clutching his head. He didn't know if the voice was real or just the echo of madness, but it broke him all the same. Whitmore watched him, his face unreadable. "Now you understand. You are your father's son. You carry his memory, his guilt, and if you break what he died to protect, then everything he sacrificed will be for nothing." Anton looked up, his eyes red. Or maybe it means everything he sacrificed was wasted. Maybe silence isn't protection, it's poison. Whitmore leaned forward, his voice a hiss, then decided quickly, "Boy, because if you speak, there are men far less patient than me waiting to shut your mouth forever." The room throbbed with silence. Two men, one bound by duty, the other by blood, staring across the abyss of the same secret. Anton clutched the photograph to his chest. He didn't know yet what choice he would make, but he knew one thing for certain. The ghosts would not let him stay silent much longer. Anton wandered the embassy halls like a man walking in two worlds. In one, he was still the dishwasher, carrying trays, scrubbing stains, ignored by staff and unseen by guests. In the other, he was haunted, his father's ghost pressing at the edges of his mind, sailors whispering in Russian through the hum of the dishwasher machine, steel corridors flickering through his vision when he blinked too long. Reality was fraying. He felt it most at night. The building was silent then, but Anton wasn't. He heard things, boots striking against metal decks, hatches slamming shut, men shouting orders. Sometimes, when he turned a corner, he swore he saw water dripping from the ceiling, black and salty. Once, he woke in his bed gasping, convinced his room had filled with seawater, until he realized it was only sweat soaking the sheets. He pressed his forehead against the cracked mirror again and again, whispering to himself, "I am Anton. I am here. I am not there." But the voices answered, layered, overlapping. "You are both. You are what we could not speak." Whitmore watched him with the eyes of a man studying an illness he feared was contagious. The ambassador never confronted him in front of others, but Anton felt the weight of his gaze at every meal, every corridor. It wasn't hatred, it was fear disguised as patience. Whitmore was waiting for him to break, and Anton knew it wouldn't be long. The spiral deepened one evening when the embassy held another dinner. Fewer guests this time, but important ones. Military advisors, a journalist with a too curious smile. Whitmore presided at the table with his usual elegance, but his eyes flicked toward Anton every time he entered with a tray. Anton's hands sweated so much he almost dropped the silver pitcher. The voices pressed harder, louder, every time he passed close to the table. Tell them who he was. Tell them what drowned." He clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. "Not here. Not in front of them, but the journalist's laughter cracked something open. "Ambassador Whitmore," she said lightly, "you've survived more Cold War stories than anyone at this table. Surely you've got one secret left you haven't shared with us." The generals chuckled. Whitmore smiled thinly. "Some things are better forgotten, and that was it." That word, forgotten. Anton felt the tray slip in his hand. Forgotten was why his father never came home. Forgotten was why 118 sailors pounded on steel doors until their lungs filled with black water. Forgotten was why his own life had been a silence stitched together with broken memories. The voices surged, unstoppable now. "Any Zabit," Anton whispered hoarsely. "Not forgotten." The room froze. The tray hit the floor with a crash, silver scattering across the carpet. Anton stood trembling, his mouth still open, his breath ragged. The journalist stared at him, startled. The generals frowned. But Whitmore's face went pale, his cigarette trembling between his fingers. For one moment, the room was split, the guests confused, Anton trembling, Whitmore frozen in recognition. Then Whitmore recovered, his voice smooth. "Forgive the staff, he's not well," but it was too late. The journalist's eyes lingered on Anton with sharp curiosity. Anton fled the room, his legs carrying him blindly down the hall. Into the dark servants' corridor, he pressed his back to the wall, gasping. His throat burned, his chest ached, but worse than all of it was the voice that came next his father's, clear and steady, as if he were standing in the hall beside him. "You are my voice now, Anton, you must carry it. You must tell them." Anton clutched his head. "No, I can't, they'll kill me." The answer came like the rush of sea water flooding a hull. "Then die speaking, not drowning in silence like we did." That night, he didn't return to his bed. He wandered the embassy like a ghost until he found himself outside Whitmore's office again. The door was closed, but light seeped beneath it. He pressed his ear against the wood. Inside, Whitmore's voice was sharp, low. "It's escalating. He's remembering more. If this spreads a pause." Another voice, faint, on the phone. Whitmore's tone hardened. "Then we silence him, quietly. The embassy has ways. You know this." Anton staggered back from the door, ball rising in his throat. He didn't need to hear more, he knew now. Whitmore wasn't just afraid of ghosts. He was afraid of the truth escaping the walls of this building, and Anton was the crack in the wall. The next day, the embassy's atmosphere shifted. Staff avoided his gaze. A guard lingered near the kitchen doors longer than usual. The air carried an unspoken warning. His time was running out. But Anton felt something else stir inside him, not fear, resolve. The ghosts were right. Silence was poison. He couldn't let Whitmore erase him, erase them, erase Kursk again. He needed to speak, but how? The answer came unexpectedly, the journalist. She returned 2 nights later, her smile sharper than before, her questions more pointed. Anton caught her glance in the dining room. She lingered on him a moment too long, as if she already knew he wasn't what he seemed. When he carried a tray past her, her hand brushed against his, a slip of paper pressed into his palm. He didn't look at it until he was back in the kitchen, hands shaking. It read, "If you know something, meet me by the service gate, midnight." Anton's heart thundered. The chance was here. He could speak. He could finally unbury the dead, but he also knew what Whitmore had said, "If you speak, you won't live long enough to regret it." The voices pressed around him, filling the kitchen like rising water. "Go, tell her. The world must know." His father's voice was loudest of all. Anton closed his eyes. Midnight was hours away, but already, he felt it looming like a trial. A choice, a breaking point. Whitmore must have sensed it too. Later that evening, as the staff cleaned up, the ambassador entered the kitchen. He didn't look at anyone else, only Anton. "Walk with me," he said softly. Anton hesitated, but followed. They walked the empty hallways in silence until they reached the ambassador's private study. Whitmore closed the door behind them, poured himself a drink, and sank into his chair. His hand shook slightly as he raised the glass. "You're planning something," he said flatly. "I can see it on your face." Anton said nothing. Whitmore stared into his drink. "Do you think your father didn't face the same choice?" He wanted to speak. He wanted to shout it from the rooftops, but he didn't. "Do you know why?" Anton's voice cracked. "Because you made him sign." Whitmore's eyes lifted, sharp. Because he realized shouting doesn't change the world, it burns it down. And he loved you too much to hand you a world in flames. Anton's fists clenched. He still drowned. Whitmore's jaw tightened. He drowned because he hesitated. Don't make the same mistake. Anton's voice shook with rage. I won't. I'm not afraid of burning. Whitmore studied him for a long time, then exhaled slowly. Then God help you, Anton, because once you start, you can't stop. And there are men out there far colder than me, waiting for someone like you to open his mouth. The silence between them felt like the deep ocean, heavy, crushing, endless. Anton turned and left without another word, clutching the slip of paper in his pocket like it was a key. Midnight awaited, and with it, the decision that could either free the ghosts or drown him among them. The night pressed heavy against the embassy, like a hand closing over a mouth. Outside, the city slept in fragments of neon and smog, but within the walls, silence held dominion. Only the faint hum of the ventilation system and the occasional shuffle of guards broke the stillness. Midnight drew near, and with it, Anton's pulse quickened to the rhythm of footsteps echoing down endless corridors in his mind. He had rehearsed it a dozen times while scrubbing plates, while stacking glasses, while pretending to be invisible. He would slip out through the servants' corridor, past the loading bay, down to the rusted gate near the service road. She would be waiting there, the journalist with sharp eyes and sharper questions. He would tell her what the voices demanded he tell. He would free his father, free the men, free himself. But fear was its own tide, dragging him back. Whitmore's warning replayed in his skull. Once you start, you can't stop. There are men colder than me waiting for you. Anton stopped outside the kitchen. The slip of paper burned in his pocket. His hands trembled. The whisper came then, clear as a breath on the back of his neck. Go, we'll be with you. He turned the handle. The kitchen was dark, smelling faintly of bleach and dish soap. A clock ticked above the door, indifferent, relentless. Anton crossed the tiles, pushed through the swinging door, and entered the back corridor. The air here was cooler, sharper. The embassy seemed different at night, its plaster walls and marble floors thinner, as if the building itself didn't want to hold the secrets inside any longer. Every step he took toward the service gate echoed louder than it should have. Twice, he froze, certain he heard someone behind him. Once, he thought he saw water spreading across the floor tiles ahead of him, reflecting pale light. But when he blinked, it was gone. The voices pulsed louder with each step. He felt them not just in his ears, but in his bones, the sailors, his father. All pressing forward, urging him to keep walking. When he reached the loading bay, he found the door half open, a faint breeze carrying the scent of asphalt and exhaust. Beyond, the narrow service road stretched into shadow. And at the gate just visible beneath the faint glow of a street lamp she stood. The journalist, her coat collar was pulled up against the chill. She smoked, the ember of her cigarette pulsing like a signal. Anton's breath caught. For a moment, he wanted to turn back, to disappear into the kitchen, to pretend none of this was happening. But her eyes caught his, and there was no return. He stepped out. You came, she said softly. Her voice wasn't mocking, wasn't probing, it was steady, almost kind. She dropped the cigarette, crushed it beneath her shoe. I wasn't sure you would. Anton swallowed, his throat raw. I shouldn't be here, which means you should, she replied. Tell me, the words lodged in his chest like broken glass. The longer he hesitated, the more the voices crowded him. Speak, speak, don't let us drown again. He looked past her, down the empty road. No guards, no Whitmore, just him, her, and the night. They died screaming, Anton whispered. Not in silence like they said. They begged, they fought. They lived for days, trapped in the dark. But they wouldn't let the world know. They buried it with them, my father. My father signed away his voice, her eyes sharpened. And Whitmore, Anton's fists clenched at the name. He had carried it like a stone in his chest for years. He was there, he forced it, he was part of the silence. My father thought if he stayed quiet, if he obeyed, I would be safe. But the silence killed him anyway. Her breath fogged in the cold, but her gaze didn't falter. Do you have proof? Anton let out a broken laugh. Proof? Proof is buried under steel and salt water. Proof is rotting bones at the bottom of the barren sea. Proof is my voice. That's all I have. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city hummed faintly beyond the walls. Somewhere, a car door slammed, distant but sharp. Finally, she reached into her coat, pulled out a small recorder, and clicked it on. The red light blinked like an eye. "Then speak," she said. Anton's chest heaved. The voices surged. His father's voice rang clearest. "This is why you survived. This is what we left you for." He opened his mouth when a shadow detached itself from the wall behind her. Anton's heart lurched. A man stepped forward. Not a guard in uniform, but someone quieter, harder. A figure in black, with the stance of someone trained to move unnoticed. His eyes were cold, empty. The journalist didn't see him. She was watching Anton, recorder poised. Anton choked. "Behind you." But the man was already moving. It happened fast. A hand clamped over her mouth, dragging her back. She struggled, muffled, her recorder falling to the ground with a sharp crack. Anton lunged forward instinctively, but another shadow appeared, slamming him against the wall. The breath left his lungs in a rush. He gasped, his vision flickering. The man pinning him said nothing, only pressed harder, crushing the air from his chest. Whitmore's voice cut through the chaos, calm, icy. "That's enough." The ambassador stepped from the darkness like he had been waiting there all along, his overcoat buttoned, his cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. He looked not at Anton, not at the journalist struggling against the man's grip, but at the recorder on the ground. He stooped, picked it up, and crushed it beneath his heel. The crack of shattering plastic echoed like a gunshot. Anton gasped, his chest burning. You knew." Whitmore's gaze finally shifted to him, cold, tired. "Of course I knew. Did you think I'd let you wander into the night unsupervised? You're not the first ghost to come clawing at my door, Anton. You're just the loudest." The man holding Anton pressed harder. Spots danced in his vision. The journalist's muffled cries grew weaker. Whitmore exhaled smoke. "You don't understand the cost of truth. You think the world cares about your father's screams. About 118 men crushed in steel. The world moves on. The living forget. Only the dead cling." Anton's rage cut through the haze. "Then let me cling," he choked. "Let me carry them. They won't let me rest." The air stilled. For a moment, Whitmore's mask faltered. A flicker of something fear, pity, passed over his face. "Then you're already dead," he said softly. He nodded once. The men tightened their grips. Anton thrashed, desperation flooding him. The voices screamed louder than ever, a cacophony filling his skull. His father's voice above them all. "Don't die in silence. Fight. Speak. Now." With a surge of panic, Anton twisted, slamming his head back against the man holding him. Bone met bone. Pain exploded, but the grip loosened just enough. He tore free, stumbling forward, colliding with Whitmore. The ambassador staggered, his cigarette falling. The journalist wrenched free of her captor at the same moment, kicking wildly. Her scream cut through the night. Anton grabbed her arm. "Run." They bolted toward the gate. Shouts erupted behind them. Boots pounded against pavement, a gun cocked. The gate loomed ahead, rusted and half open, freedom just beyond. But Anton knew, even as they ran, that this wasn't escape. This was only the beginning. The truth was awake now. The dead were speaking. And neither Whitmore nor the men in black would allow them to carry it into daylight. And as he shoved the journalist through the gate first, the voices rose like a tide, deafening, unstoppable. "You cannot run. You must choose, speak, or drown." Anton stumbled into the night, lungs burning, heartbreaking, knowing that whatever came next would decide not just his fate, but whether the Kursk would remain a grave of silence, or finally, after years of darkness, a story the living could no longer ignore. The city swallowed them. Anton barely remembered how they got beyond the gate, whether they slipped through a gap or the rusted hinges finally gave way with their combined weight. He remembered only the scraping of metal, the shouts behind them, the sudden expanse of cold asphalt beneath street lamps. He ran with the journalist's hand clamped in his, lungs tearing with every breath, shadows of pursuit snapping at their heels. The embassy fell away behind them, a dark monolith in the distance, its windows like unblinking eyes. The journalist stumbled once, nearly falling, but Anton yanked her forward. The night streets spread like a maze, alleys slick with rain, shuttered shops with neon signs still buzzing faintly, the skeletal outlines of cranes against the sky. Somewhere a siren wailed, too far to matter. Somewhere else, laughter spilled from a late-night bar, oblivious. But behind them, the footsteps didn't fade. They darted down a side street, then another, Anton's chest screaming. He had no plan, no destination, only distance. Distance from Whitmore, distance from the men. Distance from silence. Finally, when the footsteps began to scatter and fade, he pulled the journalist into a narrow alley. They collapsed against the damp wall, both gasping, their breath fogging in the cold. She bent over, hands on her knees, trying to steady herself, her hair clung to her face. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes burned with something fierce. "What the hell was that?" she hissed. Anton pressed his back against the wall, shaking, sweat stinging his eyes. You tell me, you wanted the truth. Now you've seen it, that's what they do. That's what they'll do to anyone who listens. She stared at him, chest heaving. "And you," she broke off, swallowing. "You almost died back there, her voice cracked. She turned away, pressing her palms against the wall as if steadying herself against a wave. Anton's hands trembled uncontrollably. The voices hadn't gone quiet. If anything, they were louder now, screaming at him, overlapping until he thought his skull might split open. His father's voice, the sailor's, even whispers he didn't recognize. "Don't stop, don't trust, don't breathe their lies, keep going." He pressed his fists to his temples. "They won't let me rest." The journalist turned sharply. "Who won't?" "Them." His voice was barely a whisper. "The ones left in the dark, the ones who drowned, they speak. Every night, every moment, they speak through me, and if I stop he broke off, choking on the words. Her expression shifted, not disbelief. Not quite belief either, something in between. A reporter weighing whether the story was a man's madness or a country's crime. "What do they say?" she asked softly. Anton's eyes burned. "They say the truth is rotting with them. They say I was left alive because someone had to carry it. They say I don't get to be free until it's spoken. But if I speak," he swallowed hard. "If I speak, I'll be erased." The alley pressed close around them, walls dripping with condensation, graffiti like hieroglyphs no one could read. Far above, a window opened, someone flicking a cigarette, but into the street, oblivious to the trembling man below. The journalist stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then speak to me, not to the dead, to me." Her closeness startled him. She was smaller than he realized, her face pale in the glow of a flickering lamp. But her eyes were unyielding, like someone who had faced down lies before and refused to break. He wanted to trust her, but Whitmore's words echoed too. "There are men colder than me waiting for you." He shoved past her suddenly, stumbling into the street. No, it's not safe, you don't understand. If I tell you everything, you'll end up like them." She grabbed his arm, hard, her nails dug into his sleeve. "Then let me choose that risk. You don't get to decide for me." Anton froze. Her grip was stronger than he expected, her voice sharper. And for a moment, he wondered, was she truly a journalist, or had Whitmore planted her too? Was this whole thing another layer of the trap, a way to draw him out, to make him reveal what he should have buried? The doubt was poison. He yanked free, backing into the middle of the street. A car horn blared, lights washing over him. He staggered aside as a taxi swerved past, the driver shouting curses into the night. The journalist followed, her voice cutting through his panic. "Anton, listen to me." But then he saw it, across the intersection. A black sedan, parked, lights off, windows dark. Watching, his heart stopped. The journalist saw it too, her breath hitched. God, they're here already. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, his silhouette sharp under the lamplight. Not embassy guards this time. Not polished officials, something worse. The voices surged, drowning Anton. "Run, run, run." He grabbed the journalist's hand again. They bolted down another street, weaving through alleys, past shuttered cafes and trash bins spilling over. Behind them, doors slammed, engines roared to life. The city became a labyrinth. Twice, Anton thought he saw figures ahead, cutting them off, only to realize it was his mind twisting shadows. Or was it? He could no longer tell what was real, what was pursuit, what was memory bleeding into the streets. The journalist pulled him suddenly into the doorway of a crumbling building. They pressed themselves flat as another car rolled past, its headlights sweeping. Anton's chest burned, his ears rang, his father's voice whispered, "This is what they feared." That the truth would run loose, that the silence would crack. He closed his eyes, trembling. "I can't do this." The journalist turned to him, her face inches from his. "You can, because if you don't, it all dies with you. Do you understand? That's why they're chasing you? Not because you're weak, because you're dangerous, dangerous." The word landed in him like a stone in water. All his life he had been invisible, a dishwasher, a shadow in corners. Now she said he was dangerous, not because of a weapon. Not because of strength, because of words. The realization shook him. But the fear didn't let go. He looked into her eyes. "What if I can't trust you?" Her expression didn't flicker. "Then don't, trust the dead instead, but keep moving. Because they're almost here." And as if to prove her right, a noise split the night. The building door above them creaked open. A man's silhouette appeared on the landing, a phone glowing in his hand. His gaze dropped, locking on them. The journalist cursed, "Move." They tore back into the street as the man shouted in a language Anton didn't understand. More voices answered, the hunt tightened, but with every step, Anton felt something changing inside him. The voices weren't just noise anymore. They were aligning, becoming clearer, more insistent. Like a tide building toward a single crash, choose, speak, or drown. He didn't know where they were running. He didn't know who would survive the night, but he knew the silence was ending. And Whitmore, wherever he stood in the darkness, knew it too. They found refuge in a building no one should have entered. The journalist led Anton into the forgotten quarter of the city, where the streets were cracked and swallowed by weeds, where rows of tenements sagged inward like corpses collapsing against one another. Half the windows were broken, glass glittering faintly in the gutter. Rats scattered as they passed, and somewhere deep inside a building, water dripped endlessly, echoing like a heartbeat. Anton's legs felt like lead, his lungs were fire. But still he followed, the journalist pulling him through a gap in a rusted gate, down a stairwell choked with dust and graffiti. The smell of rot clung to the air. "This way," she whispered. Her voice was steady, but her hand trembled as she shoved the warped door open. The basement was dark except for the faint light bleeding from a high, broken window. Mold crept along the ceiling, rusted pipes groaned overhead. They moved past old crates and the carcass of a forgotten mattress until they reached the back, where she finally sank onto a crate, head in her hands. Anton slid down beside her, his whole body shaking. For a long time neither spoke. The city above hummed faintly, distant cars, a dog barking, something metallic clanging in the wind. But here, in this damp hollow, it felt as if time had stalled. Finally, she lifted her head. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, but her eyes still burned. "We don't have long," she said. Anton stared at the floor. "They'll find us, maybe." She looked at him sharply. "But that depends on you. On whether you keep running or whether you make it impossible for them to silence you." He shook his head violently. "You don't understand. You think this is just information, a story, something you can print, something the world can read. And then what? People protest, governments condemn. It's nothing. It changes nothing." Her voice sharpened. "And hiding in basements changes everything." He flinched. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, eyes locked on him. "You're alive, Anton, for reasons you don't even understand. You survived when no one else did. That makes you more dangerous than all their soldiers, all their lies. Do you know what kind of power that is, to be a witness?" The word hit him like a blow. Witness. The voices stirred immediately. "Yes, witness. You saw. You carry it. Don't bury us again. Don't betray us again." He clutched his skull, rocking. "Stop, stop." She grabbed his wrists suddenly, pulling his hands down. Her strength startled him again. "Who are you hearing?" she demanded. Terror stung his eyes. He didn't want to say. He didn't want her to look at him the way Whitmore had, like a broken animal, foaming at the mouth, but the journalist didn't look away. "My father," Anton whispered finally, his voice cracked, "and others. Men I don't even know." He choked on the words. "They tell me I wasn't supposed to live, that I carry the silence. That if I die without speaking, it all dies with me." She let go of his wrists slowly. Her eyes didn't soften, but her voice did. Maybe they're right. He snapped his head up, shocked. Maybe you're the silence, Anton, she continued. And you've spent years scrubbing dishes, hiding, because it was easier than facing it. But now you're out, now they've seen you. The choice isn't whether you keep the truth or bury it. The choice is whether you let them erase you or you erase their lie first. Her words throbbed in his skull like drums. He wanted to scream at her. He wanted to collapse into her arms. He wanted to run. Instead, he staggered to his feet, pacing in the damp shadows. If I speak, if I tell you, you'll print it. You'll put your name on it. You'll be destroyed. They'll kill you. They'll make you disappear so thoroughly your family will forget you existed. She rose too, her face inches from his. Maybe, but if I don't, then what was all this for? The running, the fear, the blood. Her voice broke then, the first crack he had heard in her steel. I'm not doing this for me, don't you see? I'm doing it for you, for them, for whoever's screaming inside your head. Anton's breath came ragged. The basement tilted around him, the shadows pressed closer. He saw faces in them pale, waterlogged, eyeless faces drifting toward him, mouths opening, but no sound escaping. His father's voice rose louder than all the rest. If you die in silence, son, then I drowned for nothing. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head. The journalist knelt too, grabbing his shoulders. Anton, look at me, not them, me, he did. Her face swam through tears and shadows, her eyes did not waver. This is it, she whispered, the breaking point. Either you believe the silence will protect you, or you believe the truth will free you. There's no third path left. He wanted to answer, but words felt too heavy. So he closed his eyes, and in the darkness, he saw it all again. The ship tilting, the screams, the fire. The water-swallowing men alive, and himself, young, terrified, clutching a railing that should have snapped but didn't, and above it all Whitmore's cold face, watching. Whitmore had known, always, and still he let Anton live. Not mercy, not mistake, a warning. Anton opened his eyes. He left me alive because he wanted me afraid. He wanted me silent. The journalist's grip tightened. Then take that away from him. The basement seemed to breathe with them. Every creak of the pipes was a heartbeat. Every drop of water a countdown. Finally, Anton nodded, slowly, weakly, but he nodded. The journalist's breath hitched. Relief flickered across her face, but it wasn't joy. It was the grim acceptance of someone who knew the storm was about to break. Then we move now, she said. Before they find us, we need proof. We need a way to make this bigger than either of us. Once it's out in the open, they can't erase you without proving the story true. Her voice shook slightly. She knew the risk. Anton rose to his feet, unsteady but determined. Where? She hesitated, then said, there's a broadcast station, independent, they'll listen. If we can reach them. Oh, a noise cut her off. From above, footsteps, slow, careful, deliberate, both froze. Anton's heart slammed against his ribs. The journalist's eyes darted upward, then back to him. She mouthed, they found us. Anton listened, breath shallow. The footsteps creaked across the floorboards above, pausing, shifting. Then another set joined them, then another. A door slammed somewhere in the building. Voices murmured in low tones. The journalist grabbed his hand. We have to move, now. Anton's body wanted to collapse. But the voices surged inside him, rising like a tide. Run, speak, break it open. This is your moment. For the first time, he didn't fight them, he nodded. And together, they slipped deeper into the basement shadows as the hunters closed in, each step echoing like the toll of a bell that promised no return. They didn't run so much as drift between shadows, guided less by direction than by desperation. The footsteps above trailed them like wolves, circling, sniffing the edges of their path. Every doorway became a question, every stairwell a potential end. Anton's legs felt carved from stone, but his mind burned with a fever he had never known. The voices inside him no longer whispered. They surged, layered, indistinguishable from the rhythm of his pulse. Now, now, now. The journalist pulled him through a narrow corridor toward a rusted ladder, bolted to the wall. Up, she hissed. Anton gripped the rungs, climbing toward a grate that opened into the alley. He shoved with his shoulder. The rust screamed, but the grate loosened. Cold air spilled down. sharp with night. They hauled themselves out into darkness. The alley stretched long and crooked, dumpsters lined like coffins. For a moment, silence. Then the basement door behind them creaked. Anton didn't think. He grabbed the journalist's hand and ran. The city swallowed them again. Light smeared in his vision, neon bleeding into black. Sirens wailed in the distance, their meaning unclear, warning or lure. Cars rushed by, drivers oblivious to the two fugitives threading between them. At last they ducked into a side street, breath ragged. The journalist bent double, palms on her knees, stationed 6 blocks. If we had a voice cut through the night, calm, precise, Anton, he froze. The journalist stiffened. From the mouth of the alley, a figure stepped into view. Coat immaculate, shoes shining despite the rain-slick pavement. His face was older than the memory, but not weaker. Lines carved deep, hair thinned, yet the eyes cold, pale, unblinking, had not aged at all. Whitmore, the air seemed to collapse inward. The journalist whispered, "Oh God." Whitmore's gaze slid to her briefly, dismissing her with the efficiency of a man who had already calculated her lifespan, then back to Anton. "You survived longer than expected," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "I wondered how far fear would carry you. Now I know." Anton's knees threatened to buckle. The voices inside him shrieked, "Speak, speak." But Whitmore's presence smothered them like a heavy cloth. "You want to run to them," Whitmore continued, tilting his head toward the city. "The station, the broadcast, you think words will save you. They won't. Truth is nothing without power, and you, Anton." He allowed himself the faintest curl of a smile. "Have no power." The journalist stepped forward, voice sharp. "That's where you're wrong." Whitmore barely glanced at her. "You're an insect, chasing scraps of scandal to keep yourself fed. You won't publish him. You'll bury him the moment you realize what it costs." "They all do." The journalist's hand shook, but her voice did not. "Maybe I'm not like them." Whitmore studied her for a moment. Then, with a quiet finality, "Yes, you are." He turned back to Anton. "I let you live, boy. That night on the ship, do you understand why?" Anton's breath hitched. He shook his head, but he knew. Somewhere deep, he had always known. Whitmore stepped closer, shoes echoing in the alley. "Because silence spreads faster than fire. The dead say nothing, but the survivor. He spends his whole life choking on a truth no one will believe. You became my most faithful servant the moment you survived." Anton's chest caved. The voices surged again, louder, desperate. "He made you his silence. Don't let him. Break him. Break him." Anton lifted his head. His throat burned, words clawing upward, but fear held them. The journalist's voice cut in, trembling with urgency. "Anton, look at me. Not him, me." Her eyes locked on his. "You can end this, right now. Not tomorrow, not in some article, not in some courtroom. Here, speak." Whitmore's smile widened faintly. "Yes, speak, and watch the city laugh at you. Watch them call you mad. A dishwasher with delusions, muttering in Russian, babbling about ghosts. Speak, and you bury yourself." Anton swayed, torn between the two gravities. His father's voice rose above the rest. "Silence is death, son. Truth may kill you, but silence kills us all." Tears blurred Anton's vision. He looked at Whitmore, at the journalist, at the empty night beyond. And then he spoke, at first only a whisper. A language the journalist didn't understand, but Whitmore did. Russian. He spoke of the ship. The fire, the locked hatches, the men who begged for air as smoke filled their lungs. He spoke of orders barked in English, Whitmore's voice among them. He spoke of a deliberate fire, a staged accident meant to erase evidence, to erase men whose existence contradicted the official story. He spoke of bodies consigned to water while officials smiled on shore. The words poured from him like blood, unstoppable, fevered. Whitmore's smile faltered. Anton's voice rose, shaking, raw. He switched to English now, so the journalist could understand. "So the city beyond the alley could, if anyone listened. They killed them, they silenced them. And they left me alive so I would carry their silence. But I will not anymore." His scream cracked the night. It was not eloquence, it was not polished testimony. It was the raw wound of memory, torn open in public. For the first time, Whitmore looked uncertain. His eyes narrowed, Jaw tight, he took a step closer. "Anton," he said, voice low, You think shouting in alleys changes history? They will not believe you, they never do," but there was strain in his tone. The journalist fumbled in her pocket, a small red light blinked, a recorder. She had captured everything. Whitmore's eyes snapped to it. His composure cracked into something sharp, lethal. Anton saw the decision form in those eyes, the same decision made on the ship years ago. Erase, silence. Whitmore lunged. But the journalist was faster. She bolted down the alley, recorder clutched tight. Whitmore spun to follow, but Anton moved without thinking. For the first time in his life, he did not freeze. He threw himself at Whitmore, colliding with him, dragging him down into the wet pavement. The older man grunted, stronger than Anton expected, but Anton clung like a drowning man clings to driftwood. "You won't silence me," Anton hissed. His voice shook, but it did not falter. "Not again," Whitmore snarled, eyes wild. "You think you matter." Anton pressed his forehead against Whitmore's, trembling with fury and fear. "I don't," but they did. The voices inside him roared in unison, not whispers now, but a chorus. "Yes, yes, yes." The journalist's footsteps echoed away, vanishing into the city with the proof. Whitmore thrashed, rage twisting his features, but Anton held on. Sirens wailed closer. Headlights swept the alley, shouts, boots pounded. Anton barely heard them. He felt only the release in his chest, the silence no longer choking, but lifting. For the first time, the voices quieted, not gone, but at peace. He had spoken. Whatever came next, death, prison, madness, was no longer important, because the silence was broken. And in that moment, as the authorities swarmed, as Whitmore was dragged away thrashing, as the journalist vanished into the night with the truth burning in her recorder, Anton realized the paradox. The truth had not saved him. But it had freed him, and sometimes that was enough.